All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Great to be here and great to see so many people interested in this because it's often not the case that we can talk compliance on a stage and can be the main event and can be the main topic. Yeah, as Raquel said, the issue often is talking about, the challenge of startup onboarding. So we have been talking a lot on it's amazing to partner with startups. It's awesome to have these startups accelerating our business and being the jet ski, as João said in the morning. But the case is that the reality is way different. As Nuno said, the sales cycle is 24 months or more, and this ends up being the main frustration for the startups in our community. And also for the corporate side, because they end up seeing this as a difficult path to develop. They prefer to develop internally, or they end up seeing innovation as just a vitamin or something that does not need to be really connected to business. So I'm a board member of Portugal Fintech and also the founder of Fintech Solutions, which is our advisory arm. So we basically work with mature players that want to work with startups. That's the idea. And basically what I'm talking here is the paradox of this compliance versus innovation. So on the one hand, you have innovation teams that want to design really simple use cases because they think this is a fast way to onboard the startup in their ecosystem. And on the other side, you have compliance teams that have to understand the entire reality of a startup, what's the entire use case behind this, and what can be the roadmap ahead. If not, they cannot really accept that startup to be on board on the entity, especially on banks. So the issue is, how can you kind of design innovation models that can balance agility on one side and can also balance risk and due diligence on the other side? And that's what a lot of times banks, insurance, and startups ask us, what do we see as best practices in the market? So we tried to organize a little bit what could be the reality, and 1 year ago we did a study. A lot of the entities here participated in that study that showed that around half of the Portuguese corporates apply the same procurement processes and the same compliance processes that they apply for all the procurement that they need, all the suppliers. They apply the same reality to fintech startups. What makes sense as a whole, but also difficult, the challenges the way you want to increase speed in innovation and you want to increase ability and openness to test with the market. At the same time, on the top 5 factors that both sides refer, they all said that compliance, validation and onboarding of the startups was a top 5 factor constraining innovation. This sounds quite obvious, and I think it's the reality. And the issue is that it lowers the appetite for testing, it raises the cost of innovation, and it ends up also raising the costs for business development from the startup side. So a lot of my functions at the Fintech House is really to connect these startups to all these banks and insurance companies. But they end up thinking, okay, I will not take like 2 years to develop these use cases in Portugal because a bank in other geographies will be way big. So I must focus on the potential businesses. So what we want to focus is, how can we decrease these costs of innovation, and how can we make it more agile for corporates to really run effective innovation? I know, because there's also a lot of innovation theater, a lot of, how do they call it, safaris of startups. So they want just to understand what's in the market, they want to see what's there. There's no really intention to kind of onboard them. So I have 2 cases here to show. The first one is the FinTech Pledge. So the Tech Nation in the UK, it's already closing, so it's a sad moment. But the FinTech Pledge was created by the Tech Nation as a commitment from the financial sector in the UK to commit to best practices on how you onboard startups. So they tried to commit to 5 simple principles, from whom I tried to highlight 2, which is that you have to define a process to do this. You have to define a process in which you want to go through to test something with a startup, because the reality is different from a traditional IT supplier. And the second one is that once you define a startup onboarding process, you have to make sure you are able to fulfill it and deliver SLAs on that and provide feedback to these startups. So we do a lot of these PMOs of proof of concept and MVPs and pilots, and we also help these corporates designing these journeys together with startups. But it's always a discovery journey with them, every time. And often they don't learn from one experience to the second. So it's always a case-by-case approach, because it's a complex thing, because it's compliance related. There's common traces that you can design to understand what's really the best practices for you. And you can see the case of Barclays and how they created this landing page because they are part of the Fintech Pledge. The Barclays case study shows that once they signed the Fintech Pledge, they created this landing page on their website, they show all the steps for a POC, and they show the startups a self-assessment for them to understand if they are enterprise ready to work with Barclays or not. Because for you as a corporate, it's always really a big challenge to also say no because the startups are not mature. You're always looking to the potential and you don't want to be kind of saying no to everything, but you really need to understand if they are mature ready to work with you or not. And that's interesting because if you prepare them to show your requirements, it's easier for them to do that self-assessment for them. And the second case I want to show you is that there's already startups doing compliance as a service. So Tech Passport, it's a startup and we are working with them. They provide onboarding as a service for corporates. So you onboard on their platform, startups do the same, even if they are not really working with you. But once that partnership can be an opportunity, compliance is already pre-validated on both sides. So they understand they are a match on that reality. And it's already working, and we are trying to understand with them what's the reality of Portugal and how Tech Passport can also enter the Portuguese market so that banks and insurance can onboard on their side and startups can do the same. Because at the same time, you understand the market is relatively closed, and you understand that 75% of our startups are B2B, so you can list, and you can see in the Portugal Fintech report, almost all your potential partners in this geography, so you can try to understand if they can be compliant with you or not. Okay, so based on these two examples, we are starting a small project on streamlining innovation with fintech startups. The idea is to understand, are there best practices that you can implement in Portugal that can be used to lower the cost of innovation and speed up innovation and testing with startups in a consequent way and focusing on effective innovation. We are not trying to promote endless POCs and endless demos that do not lead to business with these startups. We are trying to understand what is currently being a waste of time by not being able of creating agile processes. So we did some initial meetings with corporates and startups, and these two examples are interesting of what they are showing. The first one is they are all trying to make this process transparent. And it's interesting because once they do it in a transparent way, they understand why they don't need really to give an answer to the startup, why cannot they cannot do this. So if you're trying to test something with client data and you don't fill these requirements, and if you don't wait for this time, you'll not be able to run a POC with us. So showing the process to the startup ecosystem is a way of also preventing you having to say no endless times. And we're discussing this a lot of times with the banks. Banks are also afraid of creating these really fast and agile email inboxes where you can send all your proposals because they don't have the capacity to answer all the proposals from the ecosystem. So I can also understand it's also a burden for corporates to be fulfilling answers and understanding if there's a match or not with all the startups that they apply to them. All the startups want to partner with the banks in Portugal, they all have to answer to these potential opportunities. So it's a screening exercise that's also difficult. And once you make it available, you can then move to the difficult part, that is defining different levels of engagement. And this is interesting because we have different realities here. So proof of concept is always, like startups are afraid of proof of concept most of the times. They are afraid that it doesn't have a consequence, and they are afraid they are being promoted by the ones that do not own the business. So they are being promoted by innovation teams or programs that do not really are attached to the reality. So we have to give weight and importance to what we are trying to do with these startups. So you have to define levels of engagement. And they can be proof of values or MVPs or pilots. You can name whatever you want because names are also really relative in this ecosystem. I've seen like POCs being done in 2 days and POCs taking like 2 years. So it's always a matter of the scope of what you are doing. But once you establish different levels of engagement, you can empower these teams, and especially business teams, to do innovation because they know what they can do in terms of compliance. Compliance have designed them rules and kinds of requirements that they have to follow to each specific type of collaboration. And once those boundaries are established, it's way easier for you to then follow and test. And the second part is, it's not really a question of responsibility, but once you show this process and the different levels of engagement, you can also force these startups to run their procurement and their due diligence on their side along the process. So we have examples here of how a proof of concept was started, and then you were able to show during that process all the certifications, all the other requirements that you have to fulfill to make compliant once you become a real supplier of that corporation. And this is interesting because if you allow the process to start, because a lot of times you also need that process to start to be able to show to the board that use case is relevant and that technology is relevant for you, you are able then to, along the process, fulfill the rest of the compliance. And a lot of times when we are following, we are doing PMO of a potential partnership, we don't really have the face of this compliance segment. So it's delivered to the customer success of the teams of the startup, and we end up like just giving like small reports. Okay, so we have to answer that question. We see a lot of exchange of emails, but you're never able to kind of follow a unique follow line, a unique checklist of requirements, and it's end up being like a waste of time and resources from both sides. That ends up creating this idea that, okay, working with startups is really difficult. If you don't work with the top, more mature startups in the market, you will be facing problems for sure. As Thomas said in the beginning, the Bank of America, for example, banks do not want to take any risks, or insurance companies do not want to take any risks. They don't want to be the ones to be the first supplier, the first client of a potential startup. But if you design the process, this becomes clear, and we have experiences of how it lowers the risk and the perceived risk of a potential partnership, and it also increases the availability of teams, especially IT teams, to then run POCs or run partnerships, whatever you want to call them. But I think that the interesting thing here is just to highlight this. You can be part of this process, so you'll be doing a research project for the next 6 months, and the ones participating in this will also benefit from trying to understand what's the best practices and how you can implement them in your own institution. But I think what I also want to really promote is that you have access to the reality of these startups, and also how these startups are getting clients abroad in other geographies, and how do they see these best practices in other cases. And that's why we also have invited Adriana, software engineer from APIAX, to show us how APIAX is really doing this in their day-by-day cases, and how they are onboarding clients in their reality, and what they see from other clients in what that's relevant. Yeah, thank you very much for having us here, and we can have a Q&A in the end.
So, hello, afternoon, good afternoon. Like António said, thank you, António, for this excellent presentation. So, my name is Adriana. I've started at APIAX 4 years ago as product owner, and now since 2 years ago, I'm also the head of software engineering for APIAX. And I mean, I know that this is a masterclass on how to integrate RegTechs, right? But the truth is that I don't have that experience. I'm on the other side. So what I can talk about is really what we are doing to actually enable these client integrations to happen, right? What do we see that it's working? So what did we do? What is our experience with that, okay? So yeah, for that, I'm going to divide it in, wait, no, I think I went. Okay, I'm going to divide my presentation in 3 parts. Just a short introduction of what we do in APIAX, because I think it's important for you to understand what we do and what integrations we allow to our clients, to then understand how we are actually doing it and enabling them, okay? And then just to close with some key takeaways that I've learned at APIAX, working at APIAX these 4 past years, okay? So let's go for it. So at APIAX, what do we do? So our mission is really to remove compliance complexity, regulatory complexity, with embedded compliance, meaning that we want that our clients, our users have right straight away answers on the daily processes that they are doing, their businesses. Right away they can make sure they are compliant, okay? So we were founded in 2017. In Switzerland. We have here one of the founders down there, okay? Right now we are already more than 60 employees in 5 global offices. So if I'm not mistaken, let me see. So London, here in Lisbon, Zurich, Frankfurt, and then Singapore also. We are part of the Fintech House since right the beginning. And like I said, we just provide millions of regulatory answers to our clients, straight away answers for them in the day-to-day. So just for you to have an idea of what type of clients have we worked until today. So we have a variety of them that go from tier 1 banks like Credit Suisse, smaller banks, but that are very international banks like Canberra, wealth management companies. So a very wide range, also some very interesting use cases, more regarding with training, like vision compliance, that we help them escalate their training and certification cross-border solution. So just for you to have an idea of what we work with. Then, just very briefly, because there is a lot to talk about our solutions, but basically we provide a lot of regulatory topics that go from cross-border, client onboarding, tax, marketing material, and so on. We have them in ready-to-use rules, or rules that can be actually customized to the risk appetite of the client. So we enable that in our rule governance system, okay? And of course, all of this then can be used and integrated into the client processes and tools. And yeah, the complexity, of course, it's always in doing this bridge, right, into the between our solution and the client's processes and tools. So let me go then to the actual topic of client integration. So how are we doing client integration at APIAX? We offer 3 ways. So a very simple first one with no integration at all. So out-of-the-box apps that they can easily use on day-to-day to have these regulatory answers that consume behind all the regulation that we have. Then a lean integration, which is basically a white labeling solution of our apps, okay? And then what we actually call the embedded compliance, which is really deep integration with our API, with exporting our rules, and then you can use and develop your own applications to your business cases, okay? So yeah. Then, I can then maybe divide in three stages these integrations that we do with the clients. Typically, we can talk about a pre-agreement, commercial agreement stage, where it's our sales. We have here some sales representatives. I'm not going into much deep into this stage because I'm not involved at all in it. But we know that we are doing 3 great things about it, right? We have a solution sales team that gets very early on involved with the clients to make sure we have a good mapping of what is the use cases, what are the client's problems, and how can we solve them, what are the right solutions. There is a clear goal alignment also. We make sure that if we go into POCs with the clients, that we make sure what are our success factors, what is the timeline. So we want to make sure that is clearly aligned with the clients. Then we also developed some internal validation tools that include technical deep dives and return of investment calculation. But if you want to know more about this, please just ask in the end, okay? Because we have here experts about that part that can help out, okay? Then, I mean, a second stage, I would say that when you have the agreement, right, the commercial agreement, we can then onboard the client. So for this, what have we done? We have, since I think it's more or less 2 years ago, a customer success team. It's onboarding the clients, making sure they learn about the product, they will use the product correctly. So really teaching, educating the clients about the product. They've also developed a knowledge base so that anytime, whenever the client needs, they can use this knowledge base, all this documentation, videos on how to use it, and they make sure there is an adoption of the product, right? Because sometimes it's not actually the end users that purchase the product, right? Typically it can be compliance officers and all of that are interested that their internal employees are compliant, right, on the day-to-day activities. So we want to make sure that those users actually use it. And that's why also our customer success team has a very specific onboarding depending on the personas that are going to use the product. So it's very specific. If you are an RM, a relationship manager that needs to use the app, they make sure they understand the product and how to use it. If you are, let's say, a tech guy that is going to implement and integrate our API, we also have technical capabilities to help them out. So it's really specific to the type of user, okay? And then I would say it's not like a last stage, but the ending stage, which is managing the normal client relationship, right? After they onboard, typically 2 weeks of onboarding, maybe more. But typically then we need to manage the relationship with them and the integrations. I mean, all of us want it to be a success so that we can potentially solve more use cases, right? For them and have upselling, all of that. So what are we doing in this field? Once again, customer success here, it's key, right? They manage all the support to the clients, make sure all the feedback comes into our product teams. We have defined, I think you talked about this disaster recovery, right? We have defined some clear goals for disaster recovery, business continuity, so that we make sure that our clients are safe on that side. And also related with that disaster recovery, right? We have continuous monitoring of our systems, of our tools, of our products. We have done a lot of work on that in the last years, automated, so we make sure we know exactly what to do when something goes wrong, okay? Then I'll just finish with some key takeaways because I think we don't have much time. But in my experience and what I think it has been going well for APIAX in these last few years, and that's probably something that we can share, is that I think we keep agile, although we are growing, right? Inside of at least my team, which is software engineering team. We keep learning every day with every client, with every integration. Then for sure the human capital. I mean, I've seen a huge difference when we start to have a customer success team. So really professional in dealing with the client, right? That we didn't have before. Make sure we have the right processes, right? Sometimes people think that being agile is not having processes, which is not true. If you have the right processes, it makes you being more agile. But having the right processes because we want to scale, right? Have more clients. And then something that it's more close to my reality of product owner, which is the product integrity, because we receive a lot of feedback every day, right, about the products, and not always and there is always this kind of question if we should or not should include it into the product, right, or if it's really just some client project specific. And it's something that we've tried also to solve many times, but I think now we are getting closer, or even if you can solve it, because maybe we cannot, it's always trying to do our best. But as I was saying, now we have like a product management team that is trying to validate more and more our solutions before we actually implement it. But this is very important because all the resources are limited, right? Yeah. And yeah, basically it was that. And just, if you want to talk with us, all of us are here around. Okay? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.